Tonight, we're traveling back over 2,000 years to a time when ordinary people faced an impossible choice. Give up everything they believed in, or stand alone against the most powerful empire on earth. This isn't just ancient history. This is a story about what happens when people decide that some things are worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than life itself. You might be listening to this as you drift off to sleep. That's perfect, because the best stories work on us even as we rest. They sink into our hearts and remind us of truths we already know, but sometimes forget. The story of the Maccabees is one of those truths. It's about a family who refused to bow, about brothers who fought impossible battles, about ordinary people who became extraordinary when the moment demanded it. But here's what makes this story different from other tales of ancient wars. This wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about building an empire or gaining wealth. This was about the right to believe, the right to worship, the right to pass on values to your children without fear. And that's why, thousands of years later, this story still matters. So settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let your breathing slow. And let me take you back to a time when the world was changing, when empires clashed, and when a small group of believers discovered that faith can move mountains. Our story begins not with heroes, but with a conqueror. His name was Alexander, Alexander the Great. You've probably heard of him. The young king who swept across the known world like wildfire, conquering everything from Greece to India before he turned 33. Alexander wasn't just a military genius. He had a vision. He wanted to unite the world under one culture, one way of thinking, one shared set of values, Greek language, Greek gods. When Alexander died young, his vast empire shattered into pieces. His generals fought over the remains like wolves over a carcass. From that chaos emerged several kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's former commanders. One of those kingdoms included the land of Israel. For generations, the Jewish people had lived under foreign rule. First the Babylonians, then the Persians, now the Greeks. They had learned to survive, to adapt, to keep their faith alive even when empires rose and fell around them. But then came a king unlike any before him. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. That second name, Epiphanes, meant God manifest. He actually believed he was a god walking among humans. And Antiochus had a problem with the Jews. You see, most conquered peoples were happy to add Greek gods to their collection. They'd worship Zeus on Monday, their local deity on Tuesday, and nobody cared. Religion was flexible, negotiable. But the Jews were different. They worshipped only one God. They refused to bow to statues. They followed strange laws about food and rest and purity. They wouldn't blend in. To Antiochus, this was rebellion, disrespect, and he decided to do something about it. What happened next would test the faith of an entire nation. It would spark a revolution that changed history. It would create heroes whose names we still remember today. But before we meet those heroes, we need to understand what they were fighting against, because you can't appreciate the light until you've seen the darkness. And the darkness that fell over the Holy Land was deeper than anyone could have imagined. If you're enjoying this story so far, consider subscribing to the channel. We create content like this regularly, stories that entertain, inspire, and help you rest peacefully. But more on that later. For now, let's continue our journey. The stage is set. The players are moving into position, and an ancient drama is about to unfold that will echo through the centuries. Take another deep breath, relax a little deeper into your pillow, and let's step together into a world where faith and power are about to collide. Chapter 1. When darkness covered the Holy Land. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that everything you believe is now illegal. That's what happened to the Jewish people under Antiochus Epiphanes. It started slowly, the way darkness always does. First came the cultural pressure. Greek gymnasiums were built in Jerusalem. Young Jewish men began participating, adopting Greek names, wearing Greek clothing, even undergoing painful procedures to reverse their circumcision so they could fit in at the gymnasium. Some Jewish leaders welcomed these changes. They saw Greek culture as sophisticated, modern, the way forward. They wanted Jerusalem to be a cosmopolitan city, not a backwater clinging to ancient traditions. But others watched with growing alarm. These weren't just cultural shifts. They were attacks on the very identity of the Jewish people. Then Antiochus made his move. He marched his army into Egypt, seeking to expand his empire. On his way back, flush with victory, he stopped in Jerusalem. And what he did next would never be forgotten. He entered the temple, the holy temple of God, the place where only priests were allowed to go. He walked right into the sacred spaces as if they were his property. And then he began to take things. The golden altar, the lampstand that had burned for generations, the sacred vessels used in worship, the treasures that had been dedicated to God. He stripped the temple like a thief in the night, loading everything onto carts and hauling it away to his palace. But he wasn't finished. The Jewish people mourned. They wept. They tore their clothes in grief. How could this happen? How could God allow his house to be desecrated? The answer to that question wouldn't come for a long time, but the suffering was only beginning. 2 years passed, 2 years of increasing pressure. Greek officials spread throughout Judea, enforcing new policies, demanding compliance. Then came the tax collector. He arrived with smooth words and false smiles. "We come in peace," he said. "We only want what's fair, what's reasonable." Many people believed him. They opened their gates. They welcomed the Greek soldiers into their towns. That's when the massacre began. Without warning, the soldiers turned on the people. They killed the men, burned the houses, tore down the walls. They took women and children as slaves. They destroyed everything the Jewish people had built. Jerusalem, the holy city, became a tomb. But Antiochus still wasn't satisfied. He wanted more than submission. He wanted complete transformation. He wanted to erase the Jewish faith from the earth. So he issued a decree, a law that would apply to everyone in his kingdom. All peoples must worship the same gods, follow the same customs, abandon their own traditions. For most nations, this wasn't a problem. But for the Jews, it was everything. The decree was specific, brutal, calculated to strike at the heart of Jewish faith. No more burnt offerings to the God of Israel. No more sacrifices. The Sabbath, the weekly day of rest that had been observed for over 1,000 years. Forbidden. The festivals that mark the rhythm of Jewish life. Outlawed. Instead, altars to Greek gods were to be erected in every town. Pigs, animals considered unclean under Jewish law, were to be sacrificed on those altars, and everyone was required to participate. Anyone caught with a copy of the Torah, the sacred law, would be executed. Anyone who circumcised their child would be killed, along with the child. And then came the ultimate abomination. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, Antiochus's soldiers marched into the temple. They erected a statue of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, right on the altar where sacrifices to the God of Israel had been offered for centuries. Then they sacrificed a pig on that altar. The temple, the dwelling place of God's presence on earth, had been turned into a shrine for idols. This wasn't just religious persecution. It was spiritual warfare. It was an attempt to kill not just people, but faith itself. The soldiers went from town to town, forcing compliance. They would set up altars in the town square and command the people to sacrifice. Many obeyed out of fear. What choice did they have? It was just a gesture, they told themselves, just a formality. God would understand. But some refused. Mothers who circumcised their baby boys were executed. The soldiers would hang the infants from the mothers' necks as a warning to others. Men who kept copies of the Torah were hunted down and killed. The scrolls were burned in public bonfires. Families who tried to observe the Sabbath in secret were discovered and slaughtered. One group of faithful Jews fled to caves in the wilderness. When Antiochus's soldiers found them on the Sabbath, they refused to fight, believing it would violate God's law to take up weapons on the holy day. The soldiers massacred them all: men, women, children. Over 1,000 people died that day, choosing faithfulness to God over self-preservation. The darkness seemed complete. The enemies had won. Faith was being crushed under the heel of imperial power. But here's something you need to understand about darkness. It's always darkest just before the light breaks through. And in a small village, far from Jerusalem, far from the seats of power, an old priest was about to make a decision that would change everything. His name was Mattathias, and he had 5 sons. Are you still with me? I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, maybe starting to drift a little. That's good. Let the story carry you, because what comes next is where everything changes. In the next chapter, we'll meet this priest who said no. This ordinary man who became extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. But before we go there, think about this. What would you do if everything you believed was suddenly illegal? If your most sacred convictions were outlawed? If practicing your faith meant death? It's an uncomfortable question, but it's the question that faced every Jewish person in those dark days. Some chose safety, some chose faith, and some chose to fight. The story of the Maccabees is about those who fought, but it's also about what they fought for. And that's what makes this story timeless. Chapter 2: The Priest Who Said No. The village of Modane sat in the hill country, a small place where life moved at the pace of the seasons. Farmers tended their fields, shepherds watched their flocks, and people tried to live quietly, hoping the trouble in Jerusalem would pass them by. Mattathias was the village priest, a man of the line of Aaron, descended from generations of priests who had served in the temple. He was old now, his beard grey, his hands weathered, but his eyes still burned with conviction. He had 5 sons, each strong in their own way. John, the eldest, steady and wise. Simon, thoughtful and strategic. Judah, fierce and brave, already known as Maccabeus, the hammer. Eleazar, loyal and devoted. And Jonathan, the youngest, clever and quick. Together, They had watched the reports from Jerusalem with growing horror. The desecration of the temple, the persecution of the faithful, the execution of families who refused to abandon their faith. And then the soldiers came to Modine. They set up their altar in the town square, just as they had in every other village. The commander, his armor gleaming in the sun, looked around at the assembled crowd. "People of Modine," he announced, "the king has decreed that all his subjects shall worship the same gods. Today, you will demonstrate your loyalty by offering sacrifice to Zeus." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Nobody moved. The commander's eyes swept the crowd and landed on Mattathias. Of course, the priest, the respected leader. If he complied, everyone else would follow. "You," the commander said, pointing. "Mattathias, you are a leader here, honored and influential. Come forward. Be the first to obey the king's command. You and your sons will be rewarded. Silver, gold, the friendship of the king himself." It was a smart move. Offer the carrot before the stick. Make it easy for him to comply. The crowd held its breath. All eyes turned to the old priest. Mattathias stepped forward slowly. For a moment, the commander smiled, thinking he had won. Then Mattathias spoke, his voice carrying across the square. "Even if every nation under the king's rule obeys him, even if they all abandon the faith of their ancestors, I will not. I and my sons and my brothers, we will walk in the covenant of our fathers." His voice grew stronger, louder. "Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the commandments. We will not obey the king's orders. We will not turn away from our faith, not to the right, not to the left." The commander's smile faded. His hand moved toward his sword, and then another man stepped forward from the crowd. A Jewish man, his face pale but determined. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll offer the sacrifice." Maybe he thought he was being pragmatic. Maybe he was genuinely afraid. Maybe he had convinced himself it didn't really matter, that God would understand. But as he approached the altar, as he reached for the knife to make the sacrifice, something broke inside Mattathias. He thought of the temple. He thought of the mothers who had died protecting their children's covenant with God. He thought of the families massacred in the wilderness. He thought of generations of his ancestors who had faithfully served the Lord, even unto death. And he thought, "Not here, not in my town, not while I still breathe." What happened next happened in seconds, though later people would describe it in slow motion, each moment crystalline and clear. Mattathias ran forward. He seized the knife from the man's hand, and before anyone could react, he struck him down. The king's commander reached for his weapon. Mattathias turned and killed him too. Then he grabbed the altar and overturned it, smashing it on the stones. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The world seemed frozen. Then Mattathias's voice rang out like a trumpet. "Everyone who is zealous for the law, everyone who stands by the covenant, follow me." And he ran. His sons ran with him, and many others, those who had been waiting for someone to stand up, someone to fight back. They ran too. They fled to the mountains, leaving behind their homes, their possessions, everything they had built. But they took with them something more valuable than property. They took their freedom to believe. News of what happened in Modine spread like wildfire through Judea. In every village, people heard the story. The old priest who said no. The man who chose death over compromise. The family who fled to the mountains to fight. And people made choices. Some said Mattathias was a fool, throwing away his life for nothing. Some said he was a fanatic, a dangerous extremist. Some said he had doomed his family and anyone who followed him. But others said he was a hero, a man who remembered what mattered, someone who valued covenant more than comfort. Those people began making their way to the mountains, one by one, then in families, then in groups. The faithful, the zealous, those who could no longer bear to watch their faith die without a fight. They gathered around Mattathias and his sons. They formed a community in the wilderness, living in caves, training for battle, preparing for resistance. But then they faced a terrible problem. A group of faithful Jews, about 1,000 of them, had hidden in caves on the Sabbath day. When the king's soldiers found them and attacked, they refused to fight back. It was the Sabbath, the day of rest, and they believed that fighting would violate God's law. So they died, all of them, men, women, children, slaughtered without raising a hand in defense. When Mattathias heard about this, he wept. Then he gathered his followers and made a decision that would change everything. If we all do as they did, he said, we'll be destroyed. We have to defend ourselves, even on the Sabbath. God gave us the Sabbath for life, not for death. We will honor the day, but we will also defend his people. It was a radical decision, a reinterpretation of the law based on circumstance. Some criticized it, but most understood the wisdom. If you're going to fight for faith, you have to survive long enough to practice it. Under Mattathias's leadership, the resistance began to take shape. They struck at night, hitting Greek outposts and fleeing before reinforcements could arrive. They destroyed pagan altars. They rescued Jewish families about to be executed. They became ghosts in the mountains, appearing and disappearing like smoke. The movement grew. The faithful had a leader. They had hope. But Mattathias was old. The strain of leadership, the stress of constant danger, the burden of knowing that so many lives depended on his decisions, it all took its toll. He knew he wouldn't live to see victory, but he could set the foundation. As his strength failed, he gathered his sons around him. Pride and anger have grown strong in the world, he told them. They bring ruin and vengeance. But you, my sons, be zealous for the law. Give your lives for the covenant of our fathers. He looked at each of them in turn. Simon, he said, you have wisdom. Be the counselor to your brothers. Let wisdom guide this movement. Then he turned to Judah, the one called Maccabeus, the hammer. Judah, he said, you will be the commander. You will lead the army. You will bring vengeance on our enemies. He blessed each son. He gave them final instructions. He reminded them why they were fighting. And then Mattathias died. He was buried in the family tomb in Modane, the same village where he had made his stand. All Israel mourned him, but they didn't give up, because Mattathias had lit a fire, and now his son Judah would tend that flame. If you're finding this story engaging, take a moment when you wake up to hit that like button. It helps others discover these stories too, but we'll talk more about that later. For now, prepare yourself, because the old priest is gone, and rising in his place is a warrior who will become a legend. The hammer is about to strike, and the whole world is about to feel it. Chapter 3. The Hammer Rises. Judas Maccabeus was not the kind of hero you might expect. He wasn't the eldest son. He wasn't the wisest. That was Simon. He wasn't a trained soldier or a powerful politician. He was the third son of a village priest. a man who had lived a quiet life until circumstances thrust greatness upon him. But he had something else, something rarer than skill or training. He had absolute, unshakable faith that God would fight for his people. When Mattathias died, the resistance could have fallen apart. They had lost their founder, their spiritual leader, the one who had sparked the rebellion. Many movements die with their founders, but this one didn't, because Judah stepped into leadership not with arrogance, but with humility, not demanding authority, but serving those who followed him. His first words as commander were simple: "We fight not for glory, but for covenant, not for power, but for faith, and we will trust the God of our fathers to give us victory." The men who heard those words believed him, and they followed him into battle. The first test came quickly. Apollonius, the governor of Samaria, heard about the growing resistance in the mountains. He assembled an army, professional soldiers with armor and training, and marched to crush this band of rebels. Judah met him with farmers and shepherds, men who had never held a sword before a few months ago. The battle should have been a massacre, but something happened that day that nobody expected. The rebels fought with the courage of the desperate. They fought with the fury of the oppressed, and they fought with a conviction that God himself was in their ranks. Apollonius fell in battle, killed by Judah's own hand. His army broke and ran. Judah took Apollonius's sword as a trophy. From that day forward, he carried it into every battle, not as a symbol of his own strength, but as a reminder that God gives victory to those who trust him. News of the battle spread. The impossible had happened. A ragtag group of rebels had defeated a professional army. But victory brings its own problems. Now the resistance was visible. Now they were a threat. And now the full weight of the Greek Empire would turn its attention toward them. Sciron, another commander, gathered a larger force. He vowed to avenge Apollonius and crush the rebellion once and for all. When Judah's scouts reported the approaching army, his men grew afraid. They looked at their own numbers, then at the enemy's, and the math didn't work out. Judah gathered them together, and he gave a speech that would be remembered for generations. "Do not fear their numbers," he said. "Do not be afraid of their strength. Remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh pursued them with chariots and horsemen. Remember that victory doesn't depend on the size of the army. It depends on strength that comes from heaven." He paused, looking each man in the eye. It's easy for many to be defeated by few. In heaven's sight, there's no difference between saving by many or by few. Victory comes not from weapons, but from God. They come against us with pride and lawlessness. We come in the name of the Lord, and he will crush them before us. Believe it or not, it worked. The men's fear turned to courage. Their doubt turned to determination. They met Seron's forces at Beth Horon, a narrow pass in the mountains. Judah positioned his men brilliantly, using the terrain to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. When the battle was joined, the Greeks discovered they weren't fighting ordinary rebels. These men fought like lions, each one worth 10 ordinary soldiers. Seron's army broke. They fled in panic, and Judah pursued them all the way to the coastal plain, striking them down as they ran. 2 victories against impossible odds. The resistance was becoming an army, and Judas Maccabeus was becoming a legend. But legends attract attention. and the attention of kings is dangerous. When Antiochus Epiphanes heard what was happening in Judea, he erupted in rage. How dare these backward peasants resist him? How dare they kill his commanders and disrupt his empire? He would have marched on Jerusalem immediately, but he had a problem. His endless wars had drained his treasury. He needed money before he could raise another army. So he made a plan. He would march east to Persia, plunder the wealthy cities there, and use that gold to finance a massive campaign against the Jews. He left his most trusted general, Lysias, in charge of the western part of his empire, and he gave Lysias explicit orders: raise an army, march on Judea, and destroy the resistance completely. Kill the leaders, scatter the people, erase the Jewish faith from the face of the earth. Lysias took the command seriously. He gathered a massive force, tens of thousands of soldiers, the largest army yet sent against the Jews. He divided his forces into 3 columns, led by experienced commanders: Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias. They would surround the rebels, trap them, and annihilate them. The Greeks were so confident of victory that slave traders followed the army, carrying chains to bind the Jewish captives they expected to sell. When Judah's scouts reported the approaching army, even he felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another battle. This was existential. If they lost, the resistance ended. The faith died. Everything his father had started would be erased. He called his men together, but before he spoke to them, he spoke to God. They fasted. They put on sackcloth, the traditional sign of mourning and repentance. They prayed with an intensity born of desperation. Lord, Judah prayed, you delivered David from Goliath. You saved our ancestors from Pharaoh. Now deliver your people from this army. Show the nations that you are the God who saves. Then he addressed his men. Tomorrow, we face the largest army we've ever seen. Many of you are afraid. That's natural. But remember why we're here. We're not fighting for territory. We're not fighting for wealth. We're fighting for the right to worship our God. And that's worth more than life itself. He paused, letting the words sink in. I won't lie to you. Some of us will die tomorrow. Maybe all of us. But if we die as free men. We die faithful. And that's something worth dying for. Before dawn, Judah did something brilliant. He divided his forces and launched a surprise night attack on the Greek camp. While one column created chaos in the center, another struck the supply trains. The Greeks, expecting a desperate defensive battle, were caught completely off guard. By the time the sun rose, the enemy camp was in flames. Soldiers fled in panic. The slave traders abandoned their chains and ran for their lives. Judah pursued them relentlessly. The battle that was supposed to be the end of the resistance became its greatest victory. When the survivors limped back to Lysias, they told stories that sounded like legend. They spoke of Jewish soldiers who fought with supernatural strength, of impossible victories, of a commander who seemed to be everywhere at once, rallying his men, striking down enemies, leading from the front. The nations around Judea heard these stories and began to fear. The Romans, far to the west, heard whispers of this rebellion and took note. Kings who had never heard of Judea suddenly knew the name Judas Maccabeus. The hammer had struck, and the sound echoed across the ancient world. But Judah knew something his men didn't. He knew that every victory made the next battle harder. that success breeds jealousy and fear, that the bigger you become, the more enemies you attract. He knew that the fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Still, for this moment, there was joy. The people sang songs of victory. They praised God. They dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could actually win. And Judah, standing on the mountain watching the enemy retreat, whispered a prayer. "Lord, I'm just a man, but you are God. Keep us faithful, keep us strong, and when my time comes, let me die as my father died, fighting for covenant." He didn't know it yet, but that prayer would be answered. Chapter 4. A light returns to the temple. After the victory at Emmaus, Lysias retreated to Antioch to regroup. He knew he had underestimated the Jewish resistance. He wouldn't make that mistake again. But before he could mount another campaign, Judah made a bold decision. He would take back Jerusalem. It was an audacious plan. The city was still occupied. Greek soldiers controlled the citadel. Taking Jerusalem meant fighting a fortified enemy in an urban environment, the hardest kind of warfare. But Judah believed the time had come. The people needed hope. They needed to see that their God had not abandoned them. So he marched on Jerusalem. The Greeks, hearing of his approach, withdrew into the citadel and barred the gates. They had supplies to withstand a long siege. Let the rebels exhaust themselves trying to breach stone walls. Judah didn't try. Instead, he led his men to the Temple Mount. What they found there broke their hearts. The beautiful temple, the place where God's presence had dwelt among his people, was a ruin. The gates were burned. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds and thorns. The altar was desecrated, still stained with the blood of pigs that had been sacrificed there. Strong men wept like children. Warriors fell to their faces in grief. But Judah wouldn't let them despair. He stood before them and said, "This is why we fight. This is what they tried to take from us. Now let's take it back." He organized the work with military precision. Some men stood guard, watching the citadel for any sign of attack. Others began the work of purification. They cleared away the overgrowth. They tore down the pagan altars. They scrubbed the bloodstains from the stones. Then they faced a difficult question. What should they do with the altar? It had been so thoroughly defiled. Could it ever be clean again? After much discussion, they decided to carefully dismantle it and store the stones in a safe place. Someday, they said, a prophet would arise to tell them what to do with those stones. Until then, they would build a new altar according to the law of Moses, using unhewn stones that no tool had touched. They made new sacred vessels to replace the ones Antiochus had stolen. They crafted a new lampstand, a new altar of incense, a new table for the bread of the presence, and slowly, day by day, the temple began to look like itself again. The work took weeks. Every detail had to be perfect. This wasn't just rebuilding a building. This was restoring the dwelling place of God. Finally, the day came when everything was ready. The priests, purified according to the law, stood ready to reconsecrate the temple. The date was significant, the 25th day of Kislev, exactly 3 years to the day after Antiochus had desecrated the temple. Exactly 3 years since the abomination of desolation had been set up on the altar. But what should have been the darkest anniversary in Jewish history was about to become its greatest celebration. As dawn broke, the priests entered the temple, and lit the sacred lampstand. The menorah, which had stood dark for 3 years, blazed with light once more. The people watching from the courtyard erupted in joy. Some laughed, some cried, many did both. Then the priests offered the first sacrifice on the new altar. Smoke rose toward heaven, and the people fell to their faces in worship. For 3 years, they had been unable to worship God in his house. For 3 years, the light had been extinguished. For 3 years, they had wondered if God had abandoned them. Now, watching the smoke rise and the lamps burn, they knew the answer. God had never left. He had been with them in the wilderness, in the battles, in the suffering, and now his house was restored. The celebration lasted for 8 days. They called it Hanukkah, which means dedication. With songs and instruments, with prayers and sacrifices, with laughter and tears, they celebrated what God had done. They decorated the temple with golden crowns and shields. They sang psalms of thanksgiving. They told stories of the victories God had given them. And they made a decree. Every year, on the 25th of Kislev, the people would celebrate this dedication for 8 days. Generation after generation would remember what happened when a few faithful people trusted God against impossible odds. If you're still listening, if you're finding peace in this story, consider sharing it with someone you love. Stories like this are meant to be passed on, but more on that later. For now, imagine being there that day. Imagine watching the light return to the temple after 3 years of darkness. Imagine the feeling in your chest as you realize that faith had won. That courage had triumphed, that the God of your ancestors had proven faithful once more. It must have felt like the end of the story, the victory complete, the temple restored, peace at last. But history is rarely that simple, and the peace they celebrated that day would prove tragically brief. Because while Judah and his men were celebrating in Jerusalem, Lysias was in Antioch, planning his next move. And this time, he wouldn't underestimate the Jewish resistance. This time, he would bring an army so large, so overwhelming, that faith itself would be tested like never before. The light had returned to the temple, but outside its walls, darkness was gathering once more. Chapter 5. Brothers in Arms. The rededication of the temple should have brought peace, but victory often creates new enemies. The surrounding nations, hearing that the Jews had reclaimed Jerusalem and restored their worship, were filled with rage. For years they had oppressed the Jewish people, taking their land, persecuting them with impunity. Now suddenly the Jews had an army. They had a leader. They were no longer helpless. And that frightened the neighboring peoples more than anything. From every direction, enemies arose. The Ammonites in the east, the Edomites in the south, the peoples of Galilee in the north, the coastal cities in the west. They coordinated their attacks, seeking to overwhelm the Jewish resistance through sheer numbers. Jewish communities scattered throughout the region sent desperate messages to Jerusalem. "Help us. We're surrounded. They're going to destroy us." Judah faced an impossible situation. He couldn't be everywhere at once. His army, though growing, was still small, and his enemies were attacking simultaneously on multiple fronts. This is where his brothers proved their worth. Judah called a council of war. With him were Simon, wise and strategic; Jonathan, clever and bold; and John, steady and dependable. Eleazar, the fourth brother, had fallen in battle earlier, crushed beneath a war elephant he had tried to kill. His sacrifice had saved many lives, but the family still grieved his loss. "We have to divide our forces," Judah said. "It's risky, but we have no choice." He looked at Simon. "Take 3,000 men and go to Galilee. Rescue our people there and bring them safely back to Judea." Then he turned to Jonathan. "You'll take 3,000 and cross the Jordan into Gilead. The communities there are completely surrounded." "And you?" Simon asked. "I'll go south to deal with the Edomites and Ammonites." It was a bold plan. By splitting his forces, Judah was gambling everything. If any of the three columns was defeated, the entire resistance could collapse. But what choice did they have? Faith sometimes requires risk. Simon marched north into Galilee. What he found horrified him. Jewish villages burned, families slaughtered, survivors hiding in caves and forests. But he also found courage. Jews who had resisted despite everything, who had held on to their faith even when it seemed God wasn't listening. Simon fought battle after battle, clearing the region of hostile forces. Then he gathered all the Jewish families from Galilee and led them in a massive exodus back to Judea. Thousands of people, with their possessions loaded on carts, following Simon's army to safety. The local populations watched them go, too afraid now to attack. The Jews weren't victims anymore. They were warriors. Meanwhile, Jonathan crossed the Jordan River into Gilead. The situation there was even worse. The Ammonites had besieged several Jewish towns, and the people inside were starving. Jonathan led his men in a forced march, covering ground at a pace that seemed impossible. When they arrived, the Ammonites were so surprised they couldn't organize a defense. Jonathan struck like lightning. He broke the siege, routed the enemy, and rescued thousands of Jewish captives. But the Ammonite commander, a man named Timothy, wasn't finished. He gathered reinforcements and pursued Jonathan, determined to wipe out the Jewish forces. The two armies met in open battle. Jonathan, outnumbered, did what his brother Judah had taught him. He prayed. Then he attacked with overwhelming aggression. The Ammonites broke and fled. Timothy himself fell in the battle. And Jonathan, like Simon, gathered all the Jewish families from the region and led them safely home. In the south, Judah was fighting his own battles. The Edomites had been bitter enemies of the Jews for centuries. Now they saw an opportunity to finally destroy their ancient rivals. Judah showed them they had miscalculated. He swept through the region like a storm, destroying pagan temples, tearing down altars to false gods, liberating Jewish communities. His reputation grew with every victory. People began to whisper that God himself fought in Judah's ranks. When all three brothers returned to Jerusalem, the people celebrated with overwhelming joy. Families reunited, survivors embraced their rescuers. The city rang with songs of thanksgiving. Against all odds, the Jewish resistance had not only survived but thrived. They had rescued their people. They had defeated multiple enemies. They had proven that faith, when backed by courage, could accomplish the impossible. But there's something important to understand about this moment. Something that makes it different from ordinary military victories. These brothers weren't fighting for empire or wealth. They weren't conquering nations or building kingdoms. They were fighting for something simpler and more profound. The right of their people to live according to their faith. Every battle was defensive. Every victory was about protection. not expansion. They fought because they had to, not because they wanted to, and that's what made them different from the empires around them. Those empires fought for glory. The Maccabees fought for survival. And there's a moral difference between those two causes that resonates even today. Take a moment when you wake up to think about that. About the difference between fighting to conquer and fighting to protect. About the difference between seeking power and defending faith. Leave a comment if you have thoughts on that question. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's return to the story. The victories were real. The joy was genuine. The people believed they had turned a corner. What they didn't know was that far to the east, in the land of Persia, something was about to happen that would change everything. King Antiochus Epiphanes, the man who had started it all, was about to face the consequences of his pride, and his death would set in motion events that would test the Maccabees in ways victory never could. Because it's one thing to fight against persecution. It's another thing entirely to build something lasting in the aftermath. The brothers had won the battles. Now they would have to win the peace. And that, as they would soon discover, was much harder. Chapter 6: The Death of a Tyrant. While Judah and his brothers were rescuing Jewish communities, Antiochus Epiphanes was in Persia, trying to solve his financial problems. His endless wars had depleted his treasury. He needed gold, and quickly. So he marched his army to the ancient city of Elymais, where a legendary temple housed immense wealth. Antiochus planned to plunder the temple, just as he had plundered the temple in Jerusalem. But the people of Elymais had heard what happened to Jerusalem. They knew what this king did to holy places. When Antiochus and his army approached, the entire city rose up against him. The people fought with desperate fury, defending their temple with their lives. Antiochus was driven back, his army repelled. It was a humiliating defeat for a man who considered himself a god. Then the messengers arrived from Judea. They brought news of multiple defeats. Lysias's armies crushed, the Jewish resistance growing stronger, the temple rededicated, Jerusalem slipping from Greek control. Everything Antiochus had worked for in Judea was collapsing. His grand plan to eliminate the Jewish faith had failed spectacularly. And worse, the story of that failure was spreading across his empire, emboldening other subject peoples to resist. Something broke in Antiochus's mind. He fell ill with a sickness that seemed to attack his whole body. Some said it was a plague. Others said it was divine judgment. Whatever the cause, the symptoms were horrific. His body began to rot from the inside. The stench was so terrible that even his own soldiers couldn't stand to be near him. Worms began eating his flesh while he was still alive. He was consumed by pain that no medicine could ease. And in that agony, something remarkable happened. Antiochus began to remember. He remembered the treasures he had stolen from the temple in Jerusalem. He remembered the families he had slaughtered. He remembered the mothers he had killed for circumcising their children. He remembered ordering pigs to be sacrificed on God's altar. For the first time in his life, Antiochus Epiphanes felt fear. Not fear of defeat, not fear of losing power, fear of something bigger, fear of standing before the God he had mocked. In his delirium, he made promises. "If I live," he said, "I'll make Jerusalem a free city. I'll restore everything I took. I'll honor the temple. I'll become a Jew myself." But the promises came too late. His body was failing. The disease consumed him. In his final moments, according to some accounts, Antiochus recognized a terrible truth. He had believed he was a god. He had called himself Epiphanes, God manifest. He had demanded worship. He had thought himself above all other powers. Now, dying in agony in a foreign land, abandoned by his army, consumed by disease, he understood how wrong he had been. "I remember the harm I did in Jerusalem," he whispered, "how I took all the vessels of gold and silver, how I sent armies to destroy Judea without cause. Now I understand. This is why these evils have overtaken me. I am dying in bitter grief in a foreign land." And then Antiochus Epiphanes, the man who had tried to erase the Jewish faith from the earth, died. Not in glory, not in victory, but in misery and shame. The news of his death reached Jerusalem like a thunderclap. The man who had seemed invincible, who had defiled the temple, who had slaughtered innocents, who had declared himself a god, was dead. The people remembered the words of their scriptures. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. But they also knew something else. Antiochus was gone, but the empire remained. His son would succeed him. The threat wasn't over. Sure enough, Antiochus's son, Antiochus Eupator, took the throne. He was young, easily influenced, still under the control of Lysias, the general who had already failed twice to crush the Jewish resistance. Lysias knew he needed to act decisively. The death of the old king created an opportunity. Before the new reign was fully established, before alliances shifted and loyalties were tested, he needed to deal with the Jewish problem once and for all. So he gathered the largest army yet, 100,000 foot soldiers, 20,000 cavalry, and 32 war elephants, massive beasts that were the ancient world's equivalent of tanks. The army that marched on Judea was designed to be overwhelming, unstoppable, terrifying. When scouts reported the approaching force to Judah, even he felt the weight of the moment. Everything they had won could be lost in a single battle. He gathered his men at Bethzur, a fortified town south of Jerusalem. The Greek army was so large it covered the hills like a flood. Judah's men looked at the enemy and felt their courage falter. They had won against impossible odds before. But this was beyond impossible. Judah walked among them, speaking quietly, reminding them of their purpose. "We've been here before," he said, "outnumbered, outmatched, staring at certain death. And every time, God has given us victory, not because we're strong, but because He is faithful." "Look at that army," one soldier said. "How can we win?" "We can't," Judah replied, "but God can, and that's enough." The battle that followed would test that faith to its breaking point. The war elephants advanced, towers mounted on their backs filled with soldiers. The ground shook with their footsteps. They were terrifying to behold, massive and seemingly invincible. Judah's brother Eleazar saw the largest elephant, draped in royal armor. He believed the young king himself was riding in the tower on its back. Eleazar made a decision. If he could kill the king, the battle might be won. So he did something incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. He ran forward, straight into the enemy lines, dodging spears and arrows. He dove under the elephant and thrust his sword upward into its belly. The elephant trumpeted in pain and collapsed, falling directly on Eleazar. He was crushed to death instantly, but his sacrifice inspired the other soldiers. They fought with renewed fury, attacking the elephants, targeting the tower crews, creating chaos in the enemy ranks. The battle raged for hours. Both sides suffered terrible losses, but neither could gain the upper hand. Finally, as the sun began to set, both armies pulled back, exhausted, bloodied, neither willing to admit defeat. Lysias looked at his losses and made a calculation. He could win eventually, but the cost would be catastrophic. These Jews fought like demons. They wouldn't surrender. Every inch of ground would be bought with blood. And he had problems back in Antioch. Political rivals were maneuvering against him. He needed to return before his position weakened further. So he did something unexpected. He made peace. He offered the Jews terms they could accept: religious freedom, the right to follow their own laws, no more forced sacrifices or persecution. In return, they would acknowledge the sovereignty of the Greek Empire and pay a modest tribute. It wasn't complete independence, but it was something even better: the freedom to worship God according to their faith. Judah accepted the terms. The war, for now, was over. As the Greek army marched away, the Jewish people celebrated. They had done the impossible. A small band of faithful believers had forced the greatest empire on earth to back down. But Judah, watching the army retreat, felt something he hadn't felt in years: unease. They had won the war. But now came something potentially more dangerous: peace. And in peace, as he would soon discover, new enemies emerge. Not foreign soldiers, but something worse. People within your own community who see compromise as wisdom and faithfulness as extremism. The battles ahead wouldn't be fought with swords. They would be fought with words, politics, and the human tendency to forget what you fought for once the fighting stops. Chapter 7. Betrayal wears many faces. Peace, Judah discovered, was more complicated than war. In war, everything was clear. You knew who your enemies were. You knew what you were fighting for. You knew that survival depended on courage and faith. But in peace, everything became muddy. People who had supported the resistance when their lives were at stake now had other concerns: trade, commerce, political influence, the opportunity to live comfortably in a Greek-dominated world. And some Jews began to think that maybe the Maccabees had gone too far. Maybe the price of independence was too high. Maybe it would be better to compromise, to make peace with the Greeks, to find a way to be both Jewish and Greek at the same time. These weren't bad people. They genuinely believed they were being wise. But they had forgotten something crucial. You can't compromise with those who want to destroy your faith. The trouble started when a new king rose to power in Syria, Demetrius I. He was shrewd, politically savvy, and he understood that military force alone couldn't subdue Judea. So he tried something different. He appointed a Jewish high priest. His name was Alcimus. He came from a legitimate priestly family, so his claim to the office wasn't technically invalid. But he was loyal to the Greeks, not to the God of Israel. He believed the future belonged to those who could navigate between cultures. Many Jews were thrilled. Finally, they thought, someone who can bridge both worlds, someone who understands Greek culture but also respects Jewish tradition. Judah was deeply suspicious. He had seen this pattern before: smooth words, promises of peace, and then betrayal. But Demetrius was clever. He sent a military commander named Bacchides with Alcimus, ostensibly just to install him peacefully as high priest. Bacchides and Alcimus arrived in Jerusalem speaking words of peace and reconciliation. No more violence, they said. No more division. Let's find a way to live together. Many people, weary of war, wanted to believe them. A delegation of scribes and religious teachers came to negotiate. "They're from a priestly family," the scribes said. "Surely they won't harm us." It was a trap. Once Maccabees had the leaders gathered in one place, he arrested them. 60 men, teachers and leaders who had trusted the promises of peace, were executed in a single day. The massacre sent shockwaves through Judea. The people realized they had been fooled. The promises of peace were lies. Maccabees then launched a reign of terror, hunting down anyone who had supported the Maccabees. He installed Greek-friendly governors in every town. He built fortresses to control the countryside. Judah and his followers fled back to the wilderness, back to the caves and mountains where the resistance had begun. They were fugitives again, hunted by an enemy who now had the support of fellow Jews. It was a dark time, darker in some ways than the original persecution, because at least then the lines were clear. Now, Jews were killing Jews, brothers were betraying brothers, and all in the name of peace and pragmatism. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted? Someone who spoke words of peace but harbored thoughts of harm? If so, you understand a little of what the Jewish people felt in those days. Drop a comment about it when you wake up, if you feel comfortable sharing. But let me continue the story, because it's about to take another turn. King Demetrius, seeing that Maccabees had secured Judea, decided he needed to eliminate Judas Maccabeus personally. As long as Judah lived, the resistance would never truly die. So he sent another commander, Nicanor. Nicanor was different from the others. He was subtle. Instead of immediately attacking, he reached out to Judah with offers of friendship. For a time, they even met and talked. Nicanor seemed reasonable, even respectful. He acknowledged Judah's courage. He spoke of finding a peaceful solution. Judah, suspicious but hoping for genuine peace, engaged in these negotiations. Maybe, he thought, this one is different. He wasn't. Nicanor's friendliness was a ruse designed to get close enough to capture Judah. When Judah discovered the plot, he withdrew immediately, refusing further meetings. Nicanor, his deception exposed, dropped all pretense of friendship. He marched his army toward Jerusalem, vowing to destroy the temple if the people didn't hand over Judah. The priests, hearing this threat, were terrified. They came out of the temple with hands upraised, pleading, "Don't destroy this holy place. Don't defile it again." Nicanor mocked them. "When I return victorious," he sneered, "I'll burn this temple to the ground." Those words sealed his fate. Judah gathered his forces one more time. Before the battle, he prayed a prayer that showed the heart of the Maccabean resistance. "Lord, when the messengers of the king blasphemed you, you sent your angel and struck down 185,000 of them. In the same way, crush this army before us today. Let the rest know that Nicanor has spoken wickedly against your sanctuary. Judge him according to his evil." The two armies met near Beth Horon. The battle was fierce, and for a time, the outcome was uncertain. Then Nicanor fell, struck down in the fighting. The moment his soldiers saw their commander dead, they broke and ran. The Jewish forces pursued them relentlessly. Nicanor's head and right hand were cut off and brought to Jerusalem, where they were displayed as proof of God's deliverance. The people decreed that this day, the 13th of Adar, should be celebrated annually as a reminder that those who blaspheme God will face his judgment. It was a great victory. But Judah, looking at Nicanor's severed head, felt no joy, only weariness. How many battles must they fight? How many enemies must they defeat? How many times must they prove that faith can't be crushed? He was tired, battle-weary, not in body, though that too, but in soul. And deep down, he knew something his men didn't. He knew that every victory made the next battle more likely, that eventually the odds would catch up with them, that sooner or later, even the mightiest warrior falls. The question wasn't whether he would fall. The question was whether the cause would survive after he did. That question was about to be answered in the most painful way possible. Chapter 8. An unlikely friendship. After the defeat of Nicanor, Judah made a decision that would have profound consequences for Israel's future. He decided to seek an alliance with Rome. It might seem strange that a Jewish resistance leader would reach out to a distant pagan empire. But Judah was thinking strategically. The Romans, he had heard, were honorable in their dealings. They made treaties and kept them. They were strong enough that an alliance with them would make the Greeks think twice about attacking Judea again. And crucially, the Romans had no interest in forcing their religion on subject peoples. They cared about political loyalty, not religious conformity. So Judah sent 2 trusted men, Eupolemus and Jason, on the long journey to Rome. They carried letters requesting a treaty of friendship and alliance. When they arrived in Rome, they were received with respect. The Roman Senate, always interested in weakening their Greek rivals, listened carefully to their proposal. The treaty they crafted was remarkable. Rome would defend Judea if attacked. Judea would support Rome if called upon. But critically, no tribute was demanded. No religious changes were required. No Roman governor would be imposed. It was essentially a recognition of Jewish autonomy in exchange for friendship with Rome. The treaty was inscribed on bronze tablets, one kept in Rome, one sent back to Jerusalem. It was a diplomatic victory that showed the world. The Jews were no longer a persecuted minority. They were a nation, recognized and respected by the greatest power on earth. But here's the tragic irony. The treaty came too late to save Judah. Because while his envoys were in Rome, King Demetrius was planning one final campaign to crush the Jewish resistance once and for all. This time, he would send an overwhelming force led by his most capable general, Bacchides, the same man who had massacred the 60 scribes. And this time, Bacchides was taking no chances. He brought a massive army, the largest yet sent against the Jews. When scouts reported the approaching army to Judah, he assembled his forces. But something terrible had happened. Many of his soldiers, seeing the size of the enemy army, lost heart. They had fought so many battles. They had won so many impossible victories. But this time felt different. Men began deserting in the night. They slipped away to their homes thinking, "We've done enough. Let someone else fight this battle." By the time Bacchides arrived, Judah had only 800 men left, against an army of thousands. His remaining commanders begged him to retreat. "We can't win this," they said. "Fall back, regroup, wait for reinforcements." Judah looked at them with sad eyes. He knew they were right tactically, but he also knew something else. If he retreated now, the myth of invincibility would be broken. The resistance would crumble. Everything his father had started, everything his brothers had fought for, would unravel. "I will not flee," he said quietly. "If our time has come, then let us die bravely for our people. Let us not leave a stain on our honor." His men, hearing these words, stood straighter. If their commander wouldn't run, neither would they. They formed up for battle at a place called Elasa. 800 men against an army so large it covered the hillsides. Before the battle began, Judah prayed one last time. "Lord, I don't ask for victory today. I don't ask to survive. I only ask that our deaths have meaning, that our sacrifice inspires others to continue the fight, that faith doesn't die with us." Then he turned to his men. "Brothers," he said, "it's been an honor to fight beside you. Whatever happens today, remember why we're here. Remember the covenant. Remember that some things are worth dying for." The battle began. Judah fought like a lion, his sword rising and falling, cutting through enemy ranks. His men fought beside him with desperate courage, selling their lives dearly. For a time, they actually drove back a portion of the enemy line. It was a testament to their skill and determination that 800 men could even challenge such a massive force. But numbers tell in the end. Slowly, inevitably, they were surrounded, cut off, overwhelmed. Judah found himself isolated, separated from his men, surrounded by enemy soldiers. He was wounded, bleeding, exhausted, but he didn't stop fighting. He stood, sword in hand, defiant to the end, and then a spear caught him. He fell to his knees. Another blow struck him. He collapsed. Judas Maccabeus, the hammer, the hero of Israel, died on the battlefield, still gripping his sword, still facing his enemies. When his soldiers saw him fall, they fought their way through the enemy lines, retrieved his body, and carried it away. They buried him in the family tomb in Modine, next to his father Mattathias. All Israel mourned him. They wept for days. They sang songs of lament. They asked, "How has the mighty fallen? How has the Savior of Israel been struck down?" The resistance seemed broken. The light seemed extinguished. The impossible victories had come to an end. But here's what the enemies didn't understand. Judah wasn't just a man. He was a symbol. He was proof that faith, when combined with courage, could accomplish the impossible. And symbols don't die, even when the person carrying them does. If you've made it this far in the story, I want you to think about something as you drift off to sleep. Think about the difference between success and significance. Judah didn't ultimately succeed in conventional terms. He died in battle. He didn't live to see complete independence, but his life was deeply significant. He lit a flame that couldn't be extinguished. He showed that faith matters more than comfort. He proved that sometimes standing firm is more important than surviving. That's a truth worth carrying with you. And maybe, as you sleep tonight, that truth will sink a little deeper into your heart. The story isn't over, of course. Judah's brothers still lived. The resistance still smoldered. And God's purposes, as always, would prevail. But Judah's death marked a turning point. The age of miraculous military victories had ended. Now would come something harder, the challenge of building a nation in the aftermath of war. And that task would fall to Jonathan, Judah's younger brother, a man who would prove that wisdom can be as powerful as the sword. Chapter 9. Wisdom in Leadership. After Judah's death, the resistance was in chaos. The men who had followed him were scattered. The enemies of Israel sensed weakness and moved to crush what remained of the movement. This was the moment when everything could have fallen apart. When the Maccabean revolution could have ended as a footnote in history. But Judah's brother Jonathan refused to let that happen. Jonathan was different from Judah. Where Judah had been a warrior, Jonathan was a diplomat. Where Judah had led with courage, Jonathan led with wisdom. Where Judah had inspired through strength, Jonathan inspired through cleverness. The people, desperate for leadership, chose him as their new commander. It was a risky choice. Jonathan was young, untested in major battles, unknown. But he had learned from his father and brothers, and he had something Judah sometimes lacked: patience. Jonathan understood that you don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes you win by outlasting your enemies, by being smarter, by turning their own divisions against them. And he was about to get a chance to prove it. The Greek Empire was fracturing. King Demetrius V faced a challenger named Alexander Ballas, who claimed to be the true heir to the Syrian throne. Both men needed allies, both men needed resources, and both men realized that the Jews, though small in number, were formidable fighters. So they both courted Jonathan. Demetrius sent letters offering peace, prosperity, and recognition if Jonathan would support him. He promised freedom to worship, autonomy in internal affairs, and even military aid against other threats. It was a generous offer. Many advised Jonathan to accept it. But then Alexander Ballas made a counter-offer that changed everything. He sent Jonathan royal robes, a golden crown, and an official decree recognizing him as High Priest of Israel. The high priesthood had been vacant since the death of the corrupt Alcimus. By appointing Jonathan to this position, Alexander was essentially recognizing Jewish sovereignty. Jonathan accepted Alexander's offer, and on the Feast of Tabernacles, he put on the sacred garments and officiated at the temple for the first time. It was a powerful symbol. The resistance leader was now the high priest. The warrior was now the spiritual leader. The hunted fugitive was now recognized by kings. The nations that had once despised the Jews now spoke of them with respect. The people who had been persecuted for their faith now practiced it openly. Protected by international treaty, it seemed like the fulfillment of everything Mattathias and Judah had fought for. But Jonathan knew better than to relax. Peace in the ancient world was always temporary. Alliances shifted, kings betrayed, promises were broken. So he continued to strengthen Jerusalem, building walls, training soldiers, preparing for the inevitable moment when peace would end. He also did something remarkably wise. He renewed alliances with Rome and Sparta, the same powers Judah had courted. He sent ambassadors with letters reminding these nations of their ancient friendship with the Jewish people. The Romans responded favorably. The Spartans, remembering their supposed kinship with the Jews, both claimed descent from Abraham, confirmed their alliance. Jonathan was building a diplomatic shield around his nation. If the Greeks attacked, they wouldn't just be fighting Jews, they'd be risking conflict with Rome. For several years, this strategy worked. Jonathan navigated the treacherous waters of Middle Eastern politics with remarkable skill. When kings rose and fell, when generals fought for power, when empires clashed, Jonathan kept his people safe. He fought when he had to, showing the same courage his brother had displayed. But he also negotiated, compromised when necessary, and knew when to retreat. It was a masterclass in leadership, and it taught an important lesson. Faithfulness to God doesn't mean being stupid about politics. You can be both righteous and wise, both faithful and strategic. But even the wisest leaders can be caught by treachery. And a man named Trypho was about to teach Jonathan a painful lesson about the limits of human wisdom. Trypho was a general in Alexander Balas's army. After Alexander died, Trypho set up a puppet king, a young boy named Antiochus VI, and ruled in his name. Trypho claimed to be loyal to the young king, but in reality, he was maneuvering to seize the throne for himself. And Jonathan, with his army and influence, was an obstacle to those plans. So Trypho did what ambitious men always do. He smiled, spoke words of friendship, and prepared betrayal. He invited Jonathan to meet him at Ptolemais, a coastal city. "Come," he said, "let's discuss our alliance. Let's plan our future cooperation." Jonathan's brother Simon counseled caution. "It's a trap," he said. "Don't go." But Jonathan, confident in his diplomatic skills, believing that his previous successes had made him untouchable, went anyway. He took 1,000 soldiers as a precaution. When he arrived at Ptolemais, Trypho welcomed him warmly. Then, as soon as Jonathan entered the city, Trypho's soldiers closed the gates. They killed Jonathan's 1,000 men and took him prisoner. Trypho sent demands to Simon. "Pay an enormous ransom for your brother's release. Send your sons as hostages to guarantee Jonathan won't rebel." Simon faced an impossible choice. He didn't trust Trypho. He knew that even if he paid the ransom and sent his sons, Trypho would likely kill them all anyway. But if he refused, Jonathan would certainly die, and people would say Simon abandoned his brother. Simon made the painful decision to pay the ransom and send his sons, knowing it probably wouldn't save Jonathan. He was right. Trypho took the money, kept the hostages, and executed Jonathan anyway. It was a brutal reminder that in a world governed by power, even wisdom and diplomacy can only protect you so far. Jonathan was buried next to his father and brother in Modine. And now the weight of leadership fell on the last surviving son of Mattathias, Simon. 3 brothers had led the resistance. 2 had died violently. Now only Simon remained. And the question hanging over Israel was simple. Could anyone finish what Mattathias had started? Could the dream of a free, faithful nation actually be realized? Or would the struggle continue forever, each generation fighting the same battles, each leader falling before the work was complete? Simon, the eldest brother, the one who had been there from the beginning, would have to answer that question. And his answer would shape Jewish history for generations to come. Chapter 10: The Price of Power. Simon was different from his brothers. Judah had been a warrior. Jonathan had been a diplomat. Simon was a builder. He was older, wiser, more patient. He had seen the cost of war. He had buried 2 brothers and countless friends. He had watched his nation suffer and bleed, and he was determined that it would not be in vain. When the people made him their leader, he made them a promise. "I will do what my father and brothers have done. I will fight for our nation, our sanctuary, and our families." But Simon understood something crucial. You can't build a nation while you're constantly fighting for survival. At some point, you have to secure actual peace, not just temporary truces. So he set about finishing what his family had started. The first problem was the citadel in Jerusalem. For years, Greek soldiers had occupied this fortress overlooking the temple. It was a constant reminder that Jerusalem wasn't truly free. Every holy day, as Jews worshipped in the temple, Greek soldiers watched from the citadel walls. It was humiliating, intolerable. Previous leaders had tried to take the citadel, but always faced the same problem. It was too strong, too well supplied. A siege would take months, maybe years, and the Greeks would send reinforcements long before it fell. But Simon was patient. He surrounded the citadel and waited. He cut off supplies. He let time do what force couldn't. Slowly, the garrison ran out of food. The soldiers inside grew desperate. Finally, they sent word that they would surrender if Simon would let them leave alive. Simon agreed, and on a day of tremendous celebration, the last Greek soldiers marched out of Jerusalem. The citadel was purified, and Simon entered it with songs and palm branches. For the first time in decades, Jerusalem was completely in Jewish hands. The people declared that this day should be celebrated annually. They wrote in the official chronicles, "On the 23rd day of the second month, in the 171st year, the Jews entered the citadel with praise and palm branches, with harps and cymbals and stringed instruments, and with hymns and songs, because a great enemy had been crushed and driven from Israel." But Simon didn't stop there. He fortified Jerusalem, building high walls and strong towers. He secured the borders, establishing garrisons at strategic locations. He renewed the alliance with Rome and Sparta, ensuring international recognition of Jewish independence. And then came the most significant moment. The people declared Simon to be their high priest, governor, and military commander, not just for his lifetime, but for his descendants after him, until a true prophet should arise. This wasn't just practical leadership. This was the establishment of a dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, named after an ancestor of Mattathias. The decree was inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed throughout Jerusalem. It listed Simon's accomplishments, how he had fought for his nation, how he had fortified cities, how he had secured peace. Under Simon's rule, the land prospered. Farmers worked their fields without fear. Old men sat in the town squares discussing the law. Young people married and raised families in safety. The scripture says, "Every man sat under his vine and fig tree, and there was none to make them afraid." It seemed like the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The dream realized, the struggle complete. Rome sent a golden shield weighing 1,000 minas as a token of friendship and honor. Kings from distant lands sent letters of congratulations. For the first time in centuries, Israel was truly free. Not just free to worship, but politically free. Sovereign, respected among nations. If you're enjoying this journey through history, take a moment when you wake to like this video and share it with someone who might appreciate it. Stories of faith and courage are meant to be passed on. But let me tell you something about human nature. Something dark that runs through all of history. Success breeds envy, peace creates complacency, and power corrupts even the most righteous intentions. Simon had achieved what his father and brothers had died trying to accomplish. But that very success would lead to his downfall. Because within his own family, someone was watching with jealous eyes. Someone who wanted the power and honor that Simon possessed. Someone who believed that family loyalty was less important than personal ambition. His name was Ptolemy, and he was Simon's son-in-law. Simon had made him governor of Jericho, a position of trust and responsibility. It should have been enough. But for some people, no position is ever enough. Ptolemy began to dream of ruling Judea himself. He convinced himself that he could do a better job than Simon, that he deserved the power and honor more than the aging leader. So he made a plan. He invited Simon and his sons to visit Jericho. "Come," he said, "let us feast together. Let us celebrate our family bonds." Simon, trusting his son-in-law, accepted the invitation. He brought 2 of his sons with him, Mattathias and Judas. Ptolemy prepared a lavish feast. Wine flowed freely. There was music and laughter. It seemed like a joyful family celebration. Then, when Simon and his sons were relaxed, comfortable, unsuspecting, Ptolemy gave a signal. Armed men rushed into the banquet hall. They fell upon Simon and his sons with swords. In moments, it was over. Simon the Maccabee, the last of Mattathias's sons, the man who had finally brought peace to Israel, died at a family feast, murdered by his own son-in-law. It was a betrayal that echoed through history, a reminder that sometimes your greatest dangers come not from distant enemies, but from those closest to you. The news spread through Judea like wildfire. People wept in the streets. The man who had brought them peace was dead, murdered, and by one of their own. Ptolemy moved quickly to seize power, but he had underestimated one thing. Simon had another son, John, who had not been at the feast. John Hyrcanus, hearing of his father's murder, immediately took action. He gathered loyal forces, secured Jerusalem, and rallied the people to his side. Ptolemy, realizing his plot had failed, fled. He would later be hunted down and executed for his treachery. But the damage was done. Simon was gone. The last of the brothers had fallen. And with him died something precious, the pure simplicity of the early resistance. Mattathias had fought for covenant. Judah had fought for freedom. Jonathan had fought for survival. Simon had fought for peace. But now, with the Hasmonean dynasty established, future generations would fight for power, for territory, for political influence. The movement that had begun with an old priest saying no to idolatry had transformed into something more complicated, more political, more worldly. John Hyrcanus would rule well. He would expand Judea's borders and strengthen the nation. But under his successors, the Hasmonean dynasty would gradually lose its way, becoming more concerned with power than with faithfulness. The lesson, as always with human history, is that institutions fail. Movements lose their way. Power corrupts. But the principles that Mattathias and his sons fought for, those remained eternal. Faith, courage, conviction, the belief that some things matter more than life itself. And that brings us to the final chapter of our story. Not the final chapter of Jewish history, certainly, but the final chapter of the Maccabean story, the place where it all leads. Chapter 11. Freedom's Final Stand. John Hyrcanus proved to be a capable leader. When he took power after Simon's death, he faced immediate challenges from every direction. King Antiochus VII of Syria, seeing an opportunity to reassert Greek control, marched on Judea with a massive army. He besieged Jerusalem, and for a time, it seemed the hard-won freedom would be lost. But John proved to be his father's son. He negotiated skillfully, fought when necessary, and eventually forced Antiochus to withdraw. The price was high, a substantial tribute and territorial concessions, but Jewish independence survived. More importantly, when Antiochus later died fighting in Persia, those concessions were reversed. John not only regained what was lost, but expanded Judea's territory, bringing under Jewish control lands that hadn't been Jewish since the Babylonian exile centuries before. He fortified Jerusalem further. He minted Jewish coins, a powerful symbol of sovereignty. He renewed alliances with Rome, ensuring that any future Greek king would think twice before attacking. Under John's long rule, Judea became more than a small mountain nation. It became a regional power, respected and feared by its neighbors. The temple services flourished. The priesthood was honored. The law was upheld. Justice was administered fairly. In many ways, it was the golden age that Mattathias had dreamed of when he first fled to the mountains. But there was a shadow over it all. A subtle shift that few people noticed at the time, but which would have profound consequences. The Hasmonean rulers, John included, began to conflate political power with spiritual authority. The high priesthood, which should have been a sacred office focused on worship and teaching, became increasingly political. The zealous faith of Mattathias, who was willing to give up everything for covenant, was gradually replaced by political pragmatism. The movement that had begun as religious resistance was becoming a political dynasty. This isn't to say that John or his immediate successors were bad people. They weren't. They genuinely tried to serve God and their nation, but power is seductive, and once you have it, it's very hard to keep the original vision pure. The later Hasmonean rulers would become increasingly corrupt. They would fight civil wars against each other. They would invite Roman intervention, eventually leading to the loss of Jewish independence. But that's getting ahead of the story. For now, in John Hyrcanus's time, the dream was still alive. Israel was free. The temple stood pure. The covenant was honored. And in the end, isn't that what the Maccabees had fought for? Not perfection, but the freedom to worship God according to their faith. They had achieved it, against impossible odds, through sacrifice and suffering, through courage and faith. The story of the Maccabees ends not with despair, but with hope. Hope that faith matters, hope that courage can overcome tyranny, hope that ordinary people, when they commit themselves to something greater than themselves, can accomplish the impossible. But there's one more thing we need to talk about. One more crucial element to this story: the timing. The Maccabean revolt happened during a period historians call the intertestamental period, the centuries between the last book of the Old Testament and the birth of Jesus. For 400 years, God was silent. No prophets, no miraculous interventions, no burning bushes or parting seas. Just ordinary people trying to remain faithful in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And the Maccabees, through their courage, kept the faith alive during those silent centuries. They restored the temple that a young woman named Mary would later visit to present her son. They preserved the scriptures that Jesus would read and quote. They maintained the Jewish identity that made it possible for God's ultimate plan, the coming of the Messiah, to unfold. In other words, the Maccabees were part of a much larger story. They didn't know it. They were just trying to survive, to remain faithful, to pass on their faith to their children. But God, working through their courage and sacrifice, was preparing the world for something greater, for a deliverer who would come not with a sword, but with love. not to fight Rome, but to conquer death itself. The Maccabees fought for freedom to worship. Jesus came to offer freedom from sin. The Maccabees established a kingdom that lasted a few generations. Jesus established a kingdom that would last forever. The Maccabees lit a flame in the darkness. Jesus came as the light of the world. And that, more than anything, is why the story of the Maccabees still matters today. Not because they were perfect, but because they were faithful. Not because they won every battle, but because they never gave up fighting for what mattered. Their story asks us a question. What are you willing to fight for? What matters so much that you'd risk everything to preserve it? For the Maccabees, it was faith, covenant, the right to worship God according to their convictions. What is it for you? That's the question to carry with you as you drift off to sleep tonight. Not in an anxious way, but in a thoughtful way. What really matters? What's worth fighting for? What's worth sacrificing for? The Maccabees gave us an answer through their lives, but you have to find your own answer for yourself. Closing, what the Maccabees teach us today. We've journeyed together through the story of the Maccabees, from the darkness of Antiochus's persecution to the light of the rededicated temple, from Mattathias's first act of resistance to John Hyrcanus's consolidation of freedom. It's been a story of courage and faith, of sacrifice and triumph, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But what does it mean for us today? First, it teaches us that faithfulness matters. In a world that constantly pressures us to compromise, to blend in, to not make waves, the Maccabees remind us that some things are worth standing firm on. Some principles are worth defending, even at great cost. Second, it teaches us that courage is contagious. Mattathias's refusal to sacrifice sparked a movement. His son's courage inspired a nation. One person standing firm can change the world. Third, it teaches us that God works through ordinary people. The Maccabees weren't superheroes. They were a village priest and his sons, farmers and shepherds who learned to fight. Ordinary people who became extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. Fourth, it teaches us that freedom is never free. Every generation that wants to remain free must be willing to fight for that freedom, whether that fight is military, political, cultural, or spiritual. Fifth, it teaches us that success can be as dangerous as persecution. The Maccabees faced their greatest challenges not during the persecution, but during the peace that followed. Prosperity and power tested them in ways that suffering never did. Sixth, and perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that we're all part of a larger story. The Maccabees didn't see the big picture. They didn't know they were preparing the way for Jesus. They just tried to remain faithful with what they had been given. We're in the same position. We can't see how our faithfulness today might impact the future. But that's okay. We're not called to see the big picture. We're called to be faithful with what we've been given. The story of the Maccabees is ultimately about faith persisting through darkness, about light returning after long night, about hope surviving when everything seems hopeless. And that's a message we all need to hear, especially in difficult times. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, carry these truths with you. Your faithfulness matters, even when you can't see the results. Courage is always possible. even in impossible circumstances. God can use ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Some things are worth fighting for. The darkest night comes just before dawn. The Maccabees lived these truths. They fought for them. Some died for them. And because they did, the faith survived. The covenant continued. The promise lived on. And eventually, in the fullness of time, in that same temple the Maccabees had rededicated, a baby would be presented to God. A baby who would grow up to be the true deliverer. The ultimate Maccabee, you might say, who fought not with swords, but with love. That's the hope the Maccabees carried in their hearts, without fully understanding it. That's the hope we can carry today, with fuller understanding. No matter how dark the night, no matter how overwhelming the odds, no matter how powerful the enemy, faith endures. Light returns. God is faithful. The Maccabees proved it, and their story, echoing across the centuries, continues to prove it today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story has meant something to you, please share it with others. Stories like this are meant to be passed on, generation to generation. And now, rest well, sleep peacefully, and carry with you the courage of the Maccabees, who showed us that faith, when tested, can move mountains. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with light.